Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the webinar today. I'm Mary Lou Bedford, and I'm the CEO of the Central Palm Beach County Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of our chair, John Carter, our board of directors and staff, we welcome you, and we hope your family, friends, and coworkers are doing well. This morning, you will hear from Clark Thomas and Jackson, Senior Manager of the Southeastern Region of the Congressional and Public Affairs Division of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Before we get started, today's webinar will be recorded and available at our website, at cpbchamber.com for future reference. Again, that's cpbchamber.com. If you have any questions for our speaker, please use the Q&A option, and after her presentation, Clark will answer as many questions as time allows. If your question is not addressed, please email us at info@cpbchamber.com. Again, info@cpbchamber.com, and we will make sure to follow up with you. Since the beginning of the pandemic, it has been the goal of the Central Palm Beach County Chamber to share with you the most updated information and resources to assist you through these challenging times. Hopefully you have been receiving our information via email or social media, but please visit our website at cpbchamber.com as we update resources daily. We will continue to work with our partners throughout the county, state, and federally, as we are committed to keep you informed as we go through this together. We are grateful to the U.S. Chamber and to Clark for joining us today. And Clark, thank you, and I will now turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Mary Lou, and to your team at the Central Palm Beach County Chamber. We at the U.S. Chamber really value and appreciate the partnership that we have with you guys and all of our other partners around the country. And it truly wouldn't be possible for us to do the work that we do in DC, advocate on behalf of businesses, if we didn't have those partnerships with our local chambers. So I just want to thank you for that and appreciate you inviting me today to talk a little bit about PPP forgiveness. And like Mary Lou said, I'll go through a presentation and I have a slide deck to go through. And at the end, I'm happy to take some questions from the audience. And if you'll use the Q&A function, you can ask questions throughout, and then I'll get to those at the end. So let me make sure that sometimes it's a little bit delayed, so give it 1 second. There we go. So today we'll go through the forgiveness portion of the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP. So unfortunately, like a lot of government programs, its rules are often very complicated and counterintuitive, particularly when it comes to the forgiveness aspect of the PPP program. So we're going to spend a little bit of time today discussing the step-by-step process about how to approach loan forgiveness under the PPP. So first, a quick overview. You may remember that the Paycheck Protection Program was created as part of the CARES Act. The best feature of this new program is that it is a loan that can turn into a grant. So all proceeds that a small business receives can be forgiven depending on how the small business uses the loan proceeds. So you'll note that there have been 2 recent actions on the forgiveness portion of the Paycheck Protection Program. So first, the Treasury Department and the Small Business Administration, which administer the program, they released the application form and instructions for loan forgiveness. The second is on June 5th, the president signed a bipartisan bill that made some changes to the PPP program in an effort to give small businesses more opportunities to maximize their loan forgiveness. The overview that we're providing today is based on that guidance. It's based on that loan application process, and it reflects the changes made by Congress a couple of weeks ago. So anything that happened prior to June 5th or anything that was in the guidance prior to June 5th is not going to be covered today. This covers the program moving forward. And just additionally, I think it's important to remember, when you are trying to get your loan forgiven, you don't go to the SBA, you don't go to Treasury, you go back to your original lender that you worked with when you received the PPP loan. So today we'll walk through a few questions, and they are: how much of my PPP loan can be forgiven? How much of, what are the repayment terms for any loan amounts that aren't forgiven? And what are the records that I should be keeping track of right now to make the process easier on the back end? So let's start with part one. How much of my loan will be forgiven? We view the loan forgiveness process as a three-step process. The first step is to determine the maximum amount of possible loan forgiveness. And that's based on what you, the borrower, spend in the 24 weeks after the loan is made. The second step is to determine how much of that maximum amount of loan forgiveness will be reduced based on certain characteristics within your business. So, namely, the number of employees that you have relative to a reference period, and the level of wages you're paying your employees. And the third is a general rule that requires 60% of your total loan forgiveness amount must be dedicated to payroll expenses. And so we're going to walk through each of these three steps. Step one. Okay, so determining the amount of the maximum loan forgiveness. Now, this is a pretty simple part of the process. First is you just simply calculate and keep track of all of your expenses in the available 24 weeks after you receive your loan. Qualifying expenses include your payroll expenses plus your non-payroll expenses that fall into certain buckets. So when you think about payroll expenses, think about the things that you use to calculate the original loan application, both the wages and the compensation you pay employees, but also certain benefits as well. And then the non-payroll expenses include mortgage interest, rent, or lease payments related to your business, as well as utility payments. And the second step, it switched. Now, the second step of the loan, of this two-step process, is to figure out when your 24 weeks begin. So this has been one of the most confusing aspects of the PPP program, particularly when you only had 8 weeks to spend the money. But with the extension to 24 weeks, hopefully this time period should be adequate enough for you to fully maximize your loan. But either way, according to the Treasury Department and the Small Business Administration, there are two options for when your 24 weeks begin. Your 24 weeks begin on the day that your PPP loan was dispersed to you. So you went to the bank, you filled out all the forms, you received a notification. The bank then deposited your loan proceeds into your bank account, and that is the day your 24-week clock has started. Now, if you happen to be a business who pays your employees biweekly or even more frequently, say on a weekly basis, you do have another option. You can start your 24-week period on the first day of the first pay period that begins after the date in which you receive the proceeds of your loan into your bank account. If you fall under that category, this might make your accounting process a lot easier to put that as your start date. And a quick tip, so many of us that are using online calculators to figure out exactly how many days 24 weeks is, so you remember that day one, the day that you received your loan amount, counts. So you have to calculate that when you determine your amount of days. So step two is determining the amount, if any, by which the maximum loan forgiveness will be reduced. So the first part of this calculation is a question about whether or not you reduced salaries or wages by more than 25%. If you have an employee who in 2019 earned $100,000 or less, or you were not employed, or they were not employed by you in 2019, you have to look at how much you were paying those employees in the 24-week period for your loan forgiveness compared to the period from January 1st to March 31st of this year. So they have to match up. You have to be paying your employees the same amount minus at most 25%. If you reduce their compensation by more than 25%, your loan forgiveness will be reduced proportionately. Your loan forgiveness could also be reduced if you've reduced the average number of employees. So here again, the federal government will look to your number of full-time equivalent employees, or FTEs, during those 24 weeks after the origination of your loan. And then they'll compare your number of FTEs to a reference period. And they're right there on the right side of your screen. Here, so your borrower, the borrower, gets to choose your reference period. You can choose from February 15th to June 30th, 2019. You can choose January 1st through February 29th of 2020. Or if you're an in-seasonal employer, you have a range of choices over a 12-week period from May 1st through September 15th, 2019. Here you're going to look at the number of FTEs you had during those 24 weeks, and then you're going to compare it to that reference period. So if that number of FTEs in those 24 weeks is smaller than the reference period, you're going to lose some of your loan forgiveness. Now, there's a couple of exceptions, however, and these are really important. So we know that many small businesses are having a hard time bringing back employees to the workforce. So if you've made a good faith written offer to rehire an employee during that 24-week period and it was rejected by the employee, you won't be penalized. Similarly, if an employee was fired for cause, voluntarily resigned, or requested a reduction in hours, you also won't be penalized. There's an important safe harbor here with respect to the reduction in wages and the reduction in the number of FTEs. So if you've done your calculations and you realize that because of the wage reduction or the FTE reduction, you're going to lose some of that loan forgiveness, you have a safe harbor that you can avail yourself of. So if you restore the wages or restore the number of employees by the end of the year, so December 31st, 2020, based on the parameters that we've outlined here, you won't lose any of that forgiveness. So that's an important caveat. Now, step 3, after you've done all of these calculations, we have to apply the 60% rule. So now remember, this was a 75% rule prior to June 5th, but now it is a 60% rule. So it's pretty simple. You simply add up the maximum amount of loan forgiveness after you've taken into consideration all of your expenses, and then you divide that amount divided by 0.6. And then you compare that to your wage expenses. So if your wage expenses are less than 60% of the total, you're going to lose some proportionately of your loan forgiveness. A simple way to think about this is if your payroll expenses for the 24-week period equals $60,000, your total loan forgiveness can't exceed $100,000. So it has to be 60% has to go to payroll. Now that we have all the calculations, we get to the good part. So how much of your loan will be forgiven? This might be the simplest part of the entire process. So your loan forgiveness will be the smallest of the following 3 amounts. First, your original PPP loan, and we hope that's the case because that means you've gotten your entire loan forgiven. Or second, the maximum amount of loan forgiveness calculated from step 1 minus step 2, or third, that maximum amount calculated using the 60% rule. So now it may turn out that you have a loan forgiveness that is less than your original loan amount. So what happens next? Well, the part that's not forgiven are to be paid back in 5 years at a maximum interest rate of 1%. And the payments are deferred for the first 6 months after the loan is originated. So remember though, there's no prepayment penalties or fees if you decide to pay the money back early. Now, we all know that the government likes a lot of paperwork and a lot of records, and there's no exception here with the Paycheck Protection Program. So you're going to want to keep basic documents as you go through this process. You're going to need documents that reflect your payroll expenses, things like bank accounts and third-party payroll services. You're also going to be asked for tax forms or equivalent forms like your payroll processor that demonstrate the wages that you pay. You also keep track of those canceled checks in your account statement so that you have plenty of records to justify the numbers that you've submitted for loan forgiveness. You're also going to need documentations about your FTEs and your non-payroll expenses. So here, those same forms like your Form 941 will help you document the number of FTEs. Your non-payroll expenses, things like mortgage, interest, business rent, and utility payments, copies of your current lease, your amortization schedule for your mortgage, or invoices for those utilities will be the basic types of things that you'll be asked to keep track of and likely submit when you make that loan forgiveness application to your lender. So that sort of wraps up the forgiveness process. However, I want to make sure that you're aware of this guide. So we have it available on our website at uschamber.com/PPP Forgiveness. So this is a step-by-step guide. It walks you through this exact same process. Of course, I'm happy to share these slides with you or with Mary Lou for her to share with you. But this guide available on our website is 4 pages and it goes through every single step of the process. And I really encourage you to download it, print it, use it as you begin to prepare your forgiveness. And then also just in general, uschamber.com/save-small-business is our Save Small Business initiative, and it has a multitude of resources available to you, and it includes these guides as well as guides to the EIDL loan program and guides to all sorts of programs that are available to small businesses throughout the coronavirus. So I encourage you to visit our website, and now I'll open it up and we'll take some questions. So let's see. Okay, so I'm going to start at the beginning. Can you collect unemployment and PPP at the same time? What about EIDL? So a PPP loan was and is made to businesses, to small businesses, in an effort to keep you off of unemployment. So in order for your loan to be forgiven up to its maximum amount, you have to keep your employees employed. So it doesn't work for you to do unemployment and receive a PPP loan. However, I'm not exactly sure about EIDL. I'll have to get back to Mary Lou on that. But I do know that there's a lot of things that you can get an EIDL loan for that doesn't include the restrictions that the PPP program has. So on PPP, you'll remember you have to use your loan for payroll. So if you're using it for payroll, it's sort of counterproductive to also be on unemployment. You won't be able to meet your guidelines in order to make your PPP loan forgiveness. But EIDL doesn't have all of those restrictions. So there's a possibility that you could do the EIDL loan and get and get unemployment as well. But you'll remember the EIDL loan is a loan and has to be repaid. It doesn't get converted into a grant. The next question, if I paid bonuses last year, but have not paid any bonuses this year, would that count as a reduction in salary? So it'll depend completely on, depend completely on your, the period of time that you selected to pay, or your reference period. So if your reference period includes a period of time where those employees got bonus, yes, it's included in your payroll. So it will be included in your payroll calculation. It'll also be included in something that you'll have to deduct from this year. But again, you have 24 weeks to make up this 60% payroll. So hopefully that's enough time for you to meet the minimum amount in order to get your full loan forgiven. If you're an independent contractor paid by commission, how do you calculate loan forgiveness? So this loan forgiveness is based on small businesses. The independent contractor loan forgiveness is different, and we will be putting a guide out when we get more guidance on the individual contractors. I'll pass that on to Mary Lou. But this loan forgiveness, what I've just gone through, is for small businesses, not the self-employed and independent contractors. You have a different process. It's very similar, but there will be some differences, and we don't have that guide just yet. Can I pay one person the 60% and still get forgiven? You can pay that one person 60% and still get forgiven if you have one person on staff. But no, that it doesn't work that way. You can't, you have to keep, the way they do it is you have to keep your wages the same or minus, 75%, but you also have to keep the amount of FTEs the same. So that sort of allows you not to fire everyone and pay one person, or yourself for that matter, 60% of payroll. So no. And another thing I'll note there, this has changed since June 5th. So the 75% rule, when it was 75-25, you could increase the owner's salary. And now that they reduced it to 60-40, you cannot do that. So during the other time, you could up your salary to meet the 75%. You can no longer do that. So you cannot increase your salary. You have to keep your salary the same as the reference period that you use in your original loan application. I'm an independent contractor with no employees, and I receive a 1099 at the end of the year, so there is no payroll. Do I write myself a check once a month for a portion of the 60% that has to go to payroll? I answered this earlier, and that these rules do not apply to the independent contractors and self-employed. So you'll have different rules that you have to go by, and I'll be sure to get those to Mary Lou so that you have that information. What utilities are we allowed to pay with the PPP loan? So they have to be utilities that you've always paid for your business. You can't start including, utilities for your home, or the way it works, and I think this is just the best way to describe it, is you just need to be able to defend it. And there's not specific utilities, they just have to be tied to your business. And I think just in general, the best way to look at it again is you need to be able to defend that this is done correctly. You don't want a situation where you're audited or they come after you because you're cheating the system. So if you feel like you can make an argument on those utilities, I would encourage you to talk to your lender and see if that's something that they will accept. It doesn't have a list again, but it needs to be something that's tied to your business. Are we resending the 941s we submitted during the application again? With the 941s, we will send with the forgiveness application. Mitchell, I'm not sure the answer to that question. the lending portion of this, you'll need to talk to your lender about how they want, what form they're going to need. This is just a guide for you to be following so you can make sure and keep up with the right forms. I'm not sure what your lender will ask for specifically. And so you'll have to talk to your lender about what forms they'll require you to have. But just in general, these are the forms that you should be keeping up with. I pay health insurance, life insurance, and 401k matching for my employees. Can I use that as part of your payroll? Yes, you can use your benefits as part of your payroll, and you should have included those as part of your calculation when you got your loan. Can you explain how to calculate the FTEs for the PPP? I'm going to send Mary Lou. Where are you, Mike C? I'm going to send Mary Lou the calculation for you. It's not something that I can describe well on this webinar, but there's a formula, and I'll send it to you. If 24 weeks is the time period for loan forgiveness, is a simple calculation of payroll over 24 weeks, being well over the loan granted, mean that 100% of the loan would be forgiven, of course, pending proper documentation. Bill, I'm not really 100% sure of your question. So you now have 24 weeks to spend. Your 60% of your payroll 60% of your loan has to be used on payroll. And you used to have only 8 weeks to spend that money, and everything else, your other 40% could go to those other things like mortgage and interest on your mortgage, rent, utility payments. But people were finding it really hard to spend 75% of that total amount on payroll in 8 weeks. And so Congress extended that to 24 weeks. So now you have 24 weeks to use 60% of your loan on payroll. That doesn't mean you have to wait 24 weeks to apply for loan forgiveness. You just have 24 weeks. Now, I hope that answers your question. What happens if you received the $10,000 after you filled out the PPP loan and then you received the PPP loan? How do you take consideration this additional money? I think you're referring to the EIDL here, maybe the emergency grant under EIDL. So the way that the EIDL works is that you were allowed to get the $10,000 extra for an emergency grant and get the PPP, but then they would wrap the $10,000 into your PPP loan forgiveness if you got the PPP. So if you got an EIDL and you got the $10,000 grant and you got a PPP, you'll reduce $10,000 from your total loan forgiveness. I think you mentioned not sending docs to the government for forgiveness, but rather the loan bank it came from. Will each bank have different requirements, I assume, who ultimately decides if forgiven? So just like the bank was the one who originated the loan, they're given guidance on how to originate the loans. They're also given guidance on how to forgive the loans. So you'll go back to your original lender. They'll walk you through the process. The reason why we're going through all this today is so that when you show up to the lender, you know what to bring with you and what you should be documenting along the way. But your lender will be the one who will talk to you about how it works exactly for your business. So, what percentage you meet, if you don't meet that percentage, say 60% for payroll, how it will be reduced proportionately. So they'll work with you on the forgiveness portion. But the application is the same for everyone, and the application is available on the Treasury website. It's just a little bit difficult to work through as a layman, which is why we're sort of providing this extra guide for you all, because it's a difficult guide. And that's also a good time to say at the U.S. Chamber, we're advocating for an easier process. And I'm not sure that it'll happen before this 24 weeks is done or before the majority of people have already gotten their loan forgiven. However, we're advocating for a few scenarios. Maybe everyone under $100,000 is either automatically forgiven, assuming they turn in their application, or under 250,000 is what some people are calling for. In general, the U.S. Chamber is just advocating for a more simple process. This is really difficult for just a small business with 1 or 2 employees, not to mention self-employed or independent contractors, to figure out without hiring someone. And so we're advocating for an easier process. But this is what we have for now. So I hope this is helpful, but if not, we can always talk offline as well. And I'd encourage you to talk to your lender. They're available for you to help you through this process. Can executives or officers be furloughed temporarily while we hire new employees we need to operate? How will this affect PPP? I'll say this, and I don't know 100% the answer to that. I'll follow back up, but the number of FTEs, it needs to be the same. It doesn't necessarily follow the person. So whether it's an executive, I'm not sure if that matters. And of course, if your loan is over 100, if your salary is over $100,000, you can't be forgiven of anything over 100,000. But just in general, your FTE number needs to be the same. It doesn't necessarily follow the employee. So again, if somebody would quit or leave and you hire somebody back on, that still counts in your FTE count. So I'm not sure how that would work on if you furloughed someone and then hired someone else. But I'll make sure and double check on that. Can I pay vacation time? Can I pay vacation to the employees I have, and what is the guide for that? So again, this follows underneath comment. You're just sort of following the just typical guidelines of a business. If it's something that you've always done, if you've always paid vacation to your employees, and you can defend that, then you should be able to pay your vacation time now during this time period to meet your 60% threshold. If you always pay your vacation to your employees December 1, and now you're trying to do it in May, you may not be able to defend that. I would talk to your lender and see what they say, but just as a general rule of thumb, if you've always done it, you can do it this time. Sure, if it makes sense to move it up 1 month or 2 months, then I think that's easily defendable. If you've always done it again, January 1, and now you're trying to do it in August for next year to make up for your 60%, I'd advise against it. But again, I'm not an attorney and I can't give you advice necessarily. I would just say talk to your lender about how they feel about that. But just in general, that's how we're sort of guiding everyone. If your business is a small business LLC and receive the PPP, can you use the PPP loan to pay the owner's salary during doing work full-time for the small business LLC? So again, if you can pay an owner's salary, if you included it in your PPP calculation in the beginning and it's under $100,000, you can continue to pay your owner's salary as well. It's just you can't increase your salary in order to meet the 60% threshold. Do I need to reduce salaries for employees that earn $100,000 or more? No, you don't need to reduce their salaries. You continue to pay them. So when you did your loan forgiveness application, or when you did your PPP application, you could count up to $100,000 for every employee that you have. You just couldn't go beyond $100,000. So you can still pay your employees with that PPP loan that percentage of their salary up to $100,000. It's just everything above that you can't pay them. I'm not sure if you can reduce their salary. I think it would still fall under the reduction portion, meaning you can't reduce an employee's wages more than 25% in order to still get your full loan forgiveness. Time frame for the vacation. Alice, I'm not sure what the question is there. I would say, again, if if you paid vacation in the prior years, you can continue to pay vacation with your PPP loan as a part of payroll. If you're creating vacation this year where you've never paid it before, I would say that that's not easily defendable to the federal government. What if you're self-employed? Again, I'm sorry if this was asked earlier. I'll get back to Mary Lou on the self-employed and independent contractors and sole proprietors. The 60% figure is a minimum. Can you base forgiveness solely on payroll? Of course, absolutely. That's the goal of the PPP program. PPP loan was given so that you didn't lay off employees and put them on unemployment. This was the federal government's solution to keep people off of unemployment. So yeah, absolutely. The 60% is totally a minimum. You can always exceed 60% and pay up to 100% for payroll. Of course, also remember you have 24 weeks, and you can use only 8 weeks if that makes more sense for you, and you meet the 60% threshold. So that way you would have some money left over for other expenses. But if you want to drag it out for a full 24 weeks and just use it for payroll, that's also allowed as well. We read you had to request from your lender to extend to the 24 weeks. Is that correct? So there's a caveat, and I explained in the very beginning that what I was going to go through today was post the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act, which was passed June 5th. This was the law that gave a lot of flexibility to the PPP forgiveness program. So in the beginning, it was an 8-week process. If your loan was originated before June 5th, you can elect to use the 8-week forgiveness or 24-week forgiveness, and you do have to make that election. But you should operate under the assumption that you're allowed to use 24 weeks if your loan was originated prior to June 5th. Are Medicare and Social Security taxes included? No. I received EIDL funds from SBA and my PPP loan from a lender on the same day. Do I combine those two when calculating PPP forgiveness, or is EIDL actually a grant that will be forgiven separately? EIDL is a loan, it is not a grant. And there are terms to repay EIDL. I believe it's over 30 years at 3.75%, I believe, or maybe 2.75 if it's under 250,000. So EIDL is not a grant; it is a loan, and there's a lot of caveats there. I don't want to go into too much detail so I can get to other people's questions. But if you have an EIDL loan, be sure that you don't use EIDL funds for the things that you can use PPP for. So you can't, if you have a PPP and an EIDL, you can't use EIDL for payroll, interest on mortgage, rent, utilities. Can't be double forgiven. So if you have a PPP loan, use the PPP for payroll, utility, rent, interest, and use your EIDL for other things, working capital, etc. But again, it was a $10,000 grant including EIDL. It was something you had to elect. It was a up to $10,000 emergency grant. That's a grant. The rest of your EIDL is a loan. What about emergency paid sick leave? Can we request a refund through our quarterly taxes? Yes, so your emergency and your paid sick leave that you were required to offer your employees through coronavirus is refundable, and it's more than refundable, it's advanced. So yes, you can apply for that, and you'll be given back the money that you paid out in sick leave. I have 2 part-time employees and one retired. The other employee is now full-time. Will that affect us? Like I mentioned in the webinar, if you have an employee who voluntarily quits or asks for a reduced amount of hours, or you have to fire on just cause, that is not penalized against your FTEs. Just make sure and document it, a written documentation to turn in with your forgiveness. We are in the entertainment industry and are still in phase 1 of reopening. It's not likely that we'll be able to restore to our previous FTE count due to the fact that events are not allowed to happen. We'll be allowed an exception to reduce our FTE count. So no. The whole reason behind the PPP program was so that you kept all of your employees employed during this time. So if you've gotten a PPP loan and you've let your employees go, your loan will be reduced proportionately. The idea behind PPP was to keep those employees employed and pay them with your PPP loan, as opposed to putting them on unemployment. So you have to rehire them, even if you're not able to use them. I would like to know if I had kept my employees on payroll from March 13th through May 13th, 8 weeks, even though I had not yet received the PPP loans, and now in May I've received the PPP loans, am I supposed to rehire the employees to comply with the loan forgiveness? So your 8 weeks starts when your loan is originated. So it sounds like your loan was originated later, and so you have a reference period in which to compare that. So what you have now, your FTE count now, you have to compare that to those 3 reference periods, and they have to equal. You can only reduce up to 25%. Can I receive the credits for the Family First CARES Act on the employee wage tax and also receive forgiveness on my PPP loan? Sunny, those are 2 separate things. The Family First CARES Act was the paycheck, I'm sorry, not the paycheck. The Family First CARES Act was the sick leave bill, and it dealt with sick leave. And then your PPP is completely separate, so you're allowed to get both. I think that answers your question. If not, Sunny, follow back up and I'll see if I can answer better. I own my office with no mortgage. Does my monthly maintenance for association count, just like an FPL bill? If it's, I don't know, Bill. I don't know if that specific utility would count. And I'm happy to do some more research on that and see if that is included. Can insurance be qualified as an expense? Yes, non-payroll. Is the forgiveness application submitted to the SBA or to the lender? To the lender. I already went through the PPP process, and yes, you have to send updated 941 forms. So that's an answer to someone else's question. Thank you. When and where do we submit the loan forgiveness documents? To your lender. You can download the application early. You can download it now on the Treasury website, just to make sure that you have all the forms that you need. But you'll do all this process with the lender that originated your loan. Is your final FTE calculated on the last day of the 24 weeks or an average over the 24 weeks? So you'll remember that I said that there's a safe harbor. And so this sort of answers your question, but also it goes a little further into your question. The answer is you have a safe harbor until December 31st, 2020 to hire back all of your employees. So you have that time period to hire them back. So even if you don't have them hired now, you have to hire them back by the end of the year, and that's included as a safe harbor that allows you to get full forgiveness. The only caveat there is you still have to meet 60% payroll. So if you can meet 60% payroll without those FTEs during this time period, you're allowed, as long as you bring yourself back up to your full FTE count by December 31st, 2020. Do I still need to deduct salaries over 100,000 from the payroll forgiveness amount? So I explained this earlier, but you can count up to $100,000. And so you'll have to do those calculations but you would prorate it down to a monthly, $100,000 down to a monthly, so $12,000 a month. And you can still pay out that much. You just can't pay over $100,000 with your PPP. Vacation pay. Can we pay the employee vacation? I answered that earlier. For the dollars not forgiven, what is the repayment terms? Oh, so you stated 5 years at 1% after June 5th, the 6-month deferral. Is the loan amortized straight line or mortgage style over the 54-month repayment period? I don't know. And but your lender will know. And I don't know exactly how that repayment will look. And to be frank, I don't know that they know how to look. It's deferred for 6 months, and I'm not sure exactly how they're gonna plan that out. But your lender may know more than I do on that. I will say this: the 5 years at 1% is for all loans that were originated prior to June 5th or after June 5th. If you've already repaid your forgiveness and you did it in the first 8 weeks, you will still be under the previous loan terms prior to the bill that Congress passed, which is a 2-year term at 1%. Can employer-paid employee parking costs count towards rent? This has been a question that's been asked before, and I believe the answer is no to this. But I'm going to have to get back to you, Mike. Assume for one funding, okay, I guess April 1st, 24 months and 10/1, safe harbor ends 12/31. Yeah, Paul, I don't know how that's going to work with the safe harbor. They haven't released the guidance on that. All I can say is that the safe harbor has been extended to the end of the year, and I'm not sure. Can you pay general liability with PPP? I'm not sure. When does repayment start? When does 3-year term start? So it's a 5-year term for your PPP, and the repayment starts after 6 months of the origination of your loan. Is the loan amount taxable? It's not as of now, no. Is there an online calculator to determine or track where we are in terms of payment of PPP loan to make sure that we hit the mark? I'd like to know if we're on track or not on track as we go, so I'm not surprised later. No, the Treasury released an online calculator. I haven't looked at it. I know it's apparently extremely difficult, and it's not easy to understand. I don't know if it tracks or if it's just a calculator for you to do it your application at the end. As far as I know, I don't know of any calculator to track it. There may be something in your payroll system. I'm not sure. That would be a good idea, though. My first pay period in the forgiveness calculation includes days before the loan disbursement date. Should I not use that payroll but the next? So you have two, okay, I think your question here is which is better for you, but there's two options and you need to use whichever one fits your scenario best. So if you got a loan, and if you got a loan, say on Monday, and you're biweekly or sooner, so it has to be at least a biweekly or weekly or payroll schedule. But if you got your loan on Monday and your payroll schedule starts on Wednesday, you'd start your 24 weeks on that Wednesday when you made your payroll. And that's how it works if you do biweekly or sooner. If you don't, you have to use the day that your loan was dispersed. In reference to the begin date of the PPP, is a semi-monthly payroll considered the same as biweekly? Great question. I'm not sure how it's written exactly. I'm sure it's written in statute exactly, and I'll have to go back and look. So let's follow back up on that. If I meet my spending after 12 weeks, can I file for forgiveness at that point rather than waiting 24 weeks? Yes. All my employees are part-time and on call. We work in the entertainment industry. We have no work, but I have not laid anyone off. How do I get loan forgiven? If you're continuing to pay your employees during this entire time, then you qualify for PPP forgiveness in totality. That's the point of the PP program. It doesn't matter if they're part-time or full-time. The way it works is a full-time equivalent. So it's not the same as only full-time employees. It's a full-time equivalent. So if you have two part-time that work 20 hours a week, 2 equal 1 full-time equivalent. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Chad. Do we need to reach our financial institution to make the election? I'm not sure which election you mean, maybe the 8 weeks or the 24 weeks. And the answer is yes. Time frame for the vacation pay can only be from the time frame of the PPP loan. It cannot be used for vacation time before the loan date. Alice, I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question. If your payroll costs have to be from the time period you received your loan until the time your loan is forgiven. Those are your PPP payroll expenses. And you can include vacation in that calculation from the date your loan is dispersed until the time it is forgiven. You can pay out vacation if it makes sense for you and your business, and it's defendable that you would normally pay vacation. However, if you've already dispersed that money, you can't go back and retroactively count it.
Clark, we'll have time for one more question and then we'll wrap.
Okay. I'm gonna skip the idle question, and Mary Lou, if you'll send that to me, I'll get back to that one. We received the PPP funds in our bank on May 14th. It's a 24-week start then. And we did not have a relationship with the lending bank, so communication is not great. If you received your funds on 5/14 and they were in your bank account, that's the day your week start. I think I've already answered that. Maybe I can find one that I haven't already answered. we are paying 4 employees a temporary additional allowance of $200 paid per week for 8 weeks while they are working remote from home. Is this allowed for the PPP funds? If it's included in payroll and it's a payroll cost, then it's included in payroll, yes. The only thing you can't do is reduce their wages. You can increase wages for sure. Okay, I think we'll wrap up there, Mary Lou, and then just if you don't mind, send me the rest of these questions, and I'll go back and see which ones I can answer that I couldn't answer, and then the ones also I didn't get to.
Absolutely. We know that this is such an important topic, and we've had so many questions. We had over 50 questions that came in, so we will definitely make sure that we get those to you. And again, anyone who did not have their question addressed, if you want to follow up with us at info@cpbchamber.com, we're happy to get those questions to Clark. And we want to thank you so much, Clark, for your time, and the U.S. Chamber for this valuable information. I know that it's an ongoing process, and it's so helpful to have you come on and update us on what's the flexibility part of this PPP forgiveness. So thank you so much. And I just want to thank all of our attendees as well. We appreciate you being on. And again, Clark is happy to answer any of the questions that we not get to. So we really appreciate it. So thank you, Clark, for being here, and thanks everyone for attending.
Thanks, Mary Lou. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone have a great day. Take care.